Kelly, you can start getting us live. Oh, great. Make sure your microphone's off then. All right, everybody, let's call the meeting to order. We've got several bills today. We have two bills that are on annexation, House Bill 142 and House Bill 73. I scheduled 142 first, but I thought we could have leeway to talk about both at the same time to see if they're connected in any way. So Senator Kinski, were you going to talk about 142? Thanks. You might as well come up too, Representative. And we don't have a representative on the other bill, do we?
Yes, he just showed up.
Representative Western.
Good morning, members of the committee. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So a little bit of background on Senate File 1, or House Bill 142. This is a constituent of both myself and Representative Western, who notified us that she found out 6 months after some property adjacent to her property had been annexed, that it had been annexed. So she resides in the city and there's county property adjacent to her. And it was annexed, and I don't know that she'd be for or against it. She didn't have a chance to provide input either way. No notice was provided to her. And so this bill, simple little bill, fixes a sort of a glaring gap in our statute. What we're looking at is section or Title 15, Article 4, annexation, determination of boundaries, addition and exclusion of land, and section 402 thereof. But the interesting part is, before we get to 402, is the definitions. The definition of a landowner means the owner of real property in the territory proposed to be annexed. So that would be the county land, anybody residing within that county land to be annexed. Then in 402A Romanet 4, it says the annexing city or town, not less than 20 business days prior to the hearing, will send by certified mail to all landowners, meaning the people residing within the county parcel to be annexed and affected public utilities, by first a summary of the proposed annexation. Nothing about any other people in the county and nothing about notice to people in the city that are near or adjacent to the property to be annexed. So this bill, quite simply, we amend Article Romanet 6 to add that they must certify that they provided notice by first-class mail to any persons owning property that is adjacent to or within 300 feet of the territory proposed to be annexed, regardless of whether the property is inside or outside the corporate limits of the annexing city or town, and regardless of whether the city or town is exercising authority under 15.3202, which I'm not sure what 15.3202 is, but it's a very simple thing that just says mail out to everybody within 300 feet of the proposed territory, including people within the city. So how that's been there all this time and never came up till now, I don't know, but that's the bill. Pretty simple, just letting people know what's going on so they have a chance to say aye or nay or provide their input one way or the other. I stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Kinski. Any questions for Senator Kinski? Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Senator, can you give me an example of what would be an issue that it's important for adjacent landowners to know? Is it just so they know? You've had a lot of experience in this part of the world of annexation, et cetera. I'm just curious about why the need to inform everyone. I like the concept of the bill. I'm just curious about that.
Go ahead, Senator Kinski.
Consider case, Senator Landon. I'll give you a typical example. You own a single-family home, and your backyard abuts a cow pasture where your children have played after trespassing over the barbed wire fence for years. Not that I have an experience at that.
We didn't have drone
And
tracking.
now you find out that there's going to be 250 acres annexed in. You'd like to know, well, what are they going to do with it? Is it going to be high-density multifamily housing, in which case probably the value of my single-family home is going to take a hit? What is it exactly they propose to build over there? Rendering plant, you know? So people like to know what's going to be next to them. That's a typical example.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Makes sense. And it seems to me there would also be a connection with utilities and roads and easements and drainage and just all sorts of things that could affect your property. Okay, any other questions by the committee? Anybody else on the bill with you? Let's hear from Representative Stivor about his bill, so then we can have a comment as expeditiously as we can. So Representative Stivor, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Case, committee. Mine's the voting annexation requirement. In section 15.1402, VI, create a new paragraph in VII, amend to read. We're adding a new paragraph. On the House side, we actually took 142 and amended it into this bill, the gross copy. The difference between 142 and 73 is mine's 550 feet. 173 has got 550 feet for notifications by first-class mail. On the other hand, my bill also says in VII, except as otherwise provided in this paragraph, not fewer than a simple majority not of the landowners of parcels of the area sought to be annexed, excluding public streets, alleys, and tax-exempt properties have approved in writing the proposed annexation by responding to the notice in paragraph VI to this subsection. Failure to respond to this notice under paragraph VI of the subsection shall be considered an approval of the proposed annexation. This paragraph shall not apply to the areas sought to be annexed, is entirely within the incorporated limits of the annexed city or town. Like here in Cheyenne, we've got 62 pockets within the city limits now that's surrounded by the city limits. So if it's surrounded, this doesn't apply. It's for when they go outside that area and annexing new land. And it puts it on the forefront of the 20 days. So when they get noticed, they have to reply back to the city. And it's kind of moving it from 406 in the statute, where once the council approves the annexation, they have 20 days after that to rebut it, and then it waits for 2 years. This is just moving it forward in this.
Okay. Is that it?
That is it, sir.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Representative Stivor? Any questions for Representative Stivor? So Representative Stivor, the language on lines 18 and 19 on page 3, this paragraph shall not apply if the area sought to be annexed is entirely within the corporate limits of the annexing city or town. That's a little bit confusing to me. But I guess what that means is islands. That says islands. So the area is not in the corporate limits, but it's surrounded by property that is in the corporate limits. And so when it says it's entirely within the corporate limits, well, by definition, it's not in the corporate limits. So that's confusing to me a little bit. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Can you help me with that?
Yes, Chairman Case. Like in the city of Cheyenne, we've got pockets that are considered county still, but everything around it is city limits within the incorporated city. For instance, up on Pershing, there's a Wells Fargo Bank.
Right.
That Wells Fargo Bank sits in the county. And so there's a problem when emergency response comes, fire, police. If something happens there, the jurisdictional areas, and that's what the city now is trying to do, is to get all that under the city limits. So where it's surrounded, can be considered, this won't be,
The vote won't be required.
yeah, the vote won't be required.
Gotcha. Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Any questions for either one? All right, let's hear from the public on these bills. Oh, Senator Scott, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just a little unclear. Right now, in the absence of this bill, there's no vote required. How does that work?
Representative Stivar.
Senator Case, Senator Scott, we're moving it up from 406 to 402. 406, after the city council and they go for the annexation, there's a 20-day period from the end of the meeting to that the landowners can go in and protest the annexation. This is just putting it on the forefront. When they actually send the certified letter saying annexation is possible, you've got 20 days from there to respond if you're for the annexation or against the annexation. If you do not respond, it'll be considered an aye vote for the landowners that don't respond.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I'm still confused. In the absence of this bill, what say do the landowners have currently?
Representative Stivar, if you can.
Senator Case, Senator Scott, it's in 406, once the city sends an annexation notice out and the council approves the annexation, they have 20 days to respond back to the city. This is just moving it forward to the beginning when they send the notice out. We're considering annexation. They've got 20 days to respond back instead of at the end.
So Representative Stivar, 406 is not in the bill, right? Is there?
406 is not.
And it's not repealed, so that would still apply. This
So
is
it's on the
additional-
forefront, and then they'll have it on the back end too, I think.
I see.
So that's,
Okay.
Senator Scott, go ahead.
And, Mr. Chairman, the effect of the landowner saying no is that it doesn't happen? That's what I'm trying to get at, Mr.
Representative Stivar.
Senator Case, Senator Scott, yes. If 51% of the landowners or parcel owners in that area say we don't want to be annexed, it's put off for another 2 years. The city can't bring it up for another 2 years.
On everything except for islands.
Except for islands. And this is just for the outlying areas that the city starts to encroach. It's to protect people and the citizens that, doesn't vote for the mayor, doesn't vote for the city council, and the city council's coming in trying to take their property. People buy in the county for a reason. That's where they want to be.
Thank you, Representative. Anybody else? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So 406 actually has the provision for 50% ownership of the land as well. It's not just 50% of the landowners, but if somebody, that 50% of the land. So is that something that should be considered in this as well? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Have fun with this one. I've got to go to another committee, and I'll get back as soon as I can. Senator Landon will.
Apparently a fight has broken out downstairs. And the chairman's got to go get in the
Godspeed,
middle
Mr.
of
Chairman.
that. So we're gonna continue the questioning of our bringers of the bills. Senator Barlow.
Mr. Chairman, my question was, in 406, it talks about 50% of the landowners or landowners owning more than 50% of the area to be annexed. So should that also be in this or this portion, this new Romanet 7? Thank you.
Representative Stivar.
Senator Landon, Senator Barlow, I believe it encompasses that, sir.
Representative Stivar, it's really tough in this room for us to hear, so can you speak into the microphone for me? Thanks. What was your answer to that?
Senator Landon, Senator Barlow, yes, I believe that encompasses the 50%.
Follow up, Senator Barlow? You good with that? Okay, any other questions of the bringers of these two bills? Okay,
Mr. Chairman?
I think
Mr.
Senator
Chairman?
Kinski.
Just in closing, I just want to make note that 142 is purely notice, does not affect any substantive or procedural or voting aspect of annexation whatsoever. Everything stays the same. This is just giving people notice. Otherwise, everything's status quo. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, appreciate that, Senator. Thank you. I want to go to testimony on these bills. Gentlemen, oh, excuse me, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there is a difference in the bills, 300 and 550. And the one bill was actually amended. It was 550 and now it's at 300. So what's the value or what's the significance of those distances? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let's start with Representative Stivar first. Representative, what brought about 550 and talk about the setbacks there.
Senator Landon, Senator Barlow, the original bill on 142 came over with 550. And we just took, during committee, they took 142 and put it into 73. And then during the committee, they changed 142 down to 300.
So
And that was.
thank you for that
House.
clarification. And I'm looking at the amendments passed on the other side, senators, and that is correct. That was brought down to 300. So both of these bills, having been amended, are equal on that front, right? Is that what you're saying, Representative? Both at 300?
Senator Landon, no. 73 is still 550 in the bill. 142, they dropped to 300 feet.
Okay. I'm clear, finally. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question for both of the sponsors is, what's important about one or the other? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's a great question, Senator Kinski. Can you help us with that?
Please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Barlow. I'm trying to remember, this bill's been in the drafting phase for 8-9 months. I think originally we might have had something like a quarter mile or a half mile. And we, then just passed the bill amongst various stakeholders, and it was narrowed down considerably from that. And I think originally the 550 was kind of a consensus amongst the stakeholders that was an appropriate number. It was certainly less than what we started out with, and the cities are looking at just how many first-class letters are we going to have to send out? What's the radius that we've got to deal with? And what happened on the House side where they amended it down to 300? I'm not sure. Probably just any number is fine as long as that notice goes out, because I think word tends to spread within neighborhoods pretty darn fast.
Okay, anything else? Committee. Okay, let's go to further testimony. Gentlemen, if you can sit back, and we reserve the right to come back to you in a minute or two if we have a question.
And Mr. Chairman, there's somebody on Zoom as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, please come forward. That's well done. And good to see you both. Please speak into the microphone. This is a very difficult room to hear, so we need to get right up to the microphone like we're doing a baseball game or something. There you go. Good morning,
Mr.
Senator.
Chairman, I tried in one of the bills
go.
to help you guys with this room. It is horrible. I thank you guys for hearing this. I'm one of the senators on House Bill 73. During the redistricting, I picked up House District 12, which is the district that Representative Steibar represents. So I'm on and for this. As I spoke to the citizens while I was campaigning, they really want this type of legislation to pass forward. And I just wanted to say something to Senator Barlow, if I may, Mr. Chairman. And that is, he brought up a question about the 50% ownership. I'm not really certain just yet, so I'd like to reserve your idea until I can talk to the bringer of the bill to just make sure that that is indeed included. So that was my comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions for our fellow senator this morning?
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Senator. Appreciate it. Good
Mr.
morning.
Chairman, good morning. Lori Gerbekite with the Wyoming Realtors. We are obviously in support of 142. That was the constituent that was mentioned earlier. It was a member of the Wyoming Realtors, and she came to me and stated her issues, her concerns. And so we took it to our board of directors, and surprisingly, on our board of directors, we had several members that were members of planning and zoning commissions in their own communities. They all agreed that this was a great idea, that the more notice that's given, the better, the earlier, the better, and it just saves a lot of problems. I don't know if our member is the one that's online or not, but the issue, and you had asked this question earlier, why would it be necessary for those people to be notified? The property was annexed, and there was no county or city maintained road. It was a private road, and there was no place for off-street parking, and their plan was a multi-unit family building. So had they had that discussion earlier, it might have solved a lot of problems, because then when it got to zoning, they are notified when it goes to the zoning. But had they known earlier, it could have solved maybe a lot of problems and saved a lot of headaches. So we're very supportive of 142, and I will take all the blame for the House Bill 73 being, we asked that 142 be amended in because it hadn't been numbered yet when this came up. This was an early bill. So it would be my suggestion, because they really originally did two separate things. That on page 2 of House Bill 73, that you delete the language we inserted starting on after territory on line 15 through line 21. And then it is the pure bill that Representative Steibar originally brought, which is giving the people the vote prior to the annexation. And then you'd have two separate issues. You have the notification, that is 142, and you'd have the vote of the people that are being annexed prior to the annexation in House Bill 73. And I'd be happy to try and answer any other questions.
No, thank you, Ms. Orbick. I appreciate it. The adjacent land issue coming into focus really well, and appreciate your comment. Any questions of the Realtors Association? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to come forward and testify on House Bill 142? We're also concurrently taking testimony on House Bill 73. So House Bill 142 and House Bill 73. Good morning. We know who you are, but if you'd please state your name for the record, and we've got people streaming in this morning, so they'll want to know.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Patrick Collins, mayor here in Cheyenne. We have two bills in front of us, and just to start off with, I think our existing annexation laws are very good, with one glaring exception, and that's what 142 addresses. The current law says that we have to notify everyone in the area, every landowner in the area being annexed by certified mail. But it doesn't say anything about the people outside of that. And I can't remember who asked the question. It might have been Mr. Barlow asked, why is it important to be notified about an annexation? Because state law also requires when you annex a piece of property, you have to zone it. And the zoning is, I think, what's really important. And so people want to know, what's that property going to be used for? And so prior notices, I think, are a really important concept so that people know what's going to happen into their neighborhoods. The bill did have 550 feet. when it first came in, and I testified in committee that 300 feet is a better number. And the reason for that is that we have to notice everyone in a zone change within 300 feet. We did a survey of most of the cities, or many of the cities in the state, and the number that we came up with, the largest number we found was 300 feet. And that way, the notice that we're giving would be consistent with the zone change and the annexation. But I think the transparency is important. It's the right thing to do, and I think House Bill 142 does that really well. The other thing we asked for was not to be certified mail. We have a lot of pockets in small areas, and if someone has an infrastructure problem, a sewer main breaks or a water main breaks, they have to hook up to the city sewer and water, they would be responsible for sending that notice out. And with the density that we have, it could be $500, $700, $800 to send those notices out by certified mail, and it might be $50 by first-class mail. And if our goal is to get it noticed, we should try to make it as easy on those folks as we can. The city doesn't pay for those. The people are doing the annexation pays for those notices. And so anyways, I would ask for your support of House Bill 142. House Bill 73, on the other hand, I think is a bill that tries to address a problem that really doesn't, that I think the current law does a good job of taking care of. And I tried to make a notebook here for you just so that you could see a little bit of what's going on and talk a little bit about the law as it currently states. I apologize. I wasn't at the House Corporations Committee meeting. That was Martin Luther King Day. I was out marching and speaking for that holiday, and so I wasn't able to refute some of the things that were said. But we had a lot of members of our community here who came and testified that Cheyenne is not following state law, that we're specifically annexing people without giving them notice. And I think part of that is because people didn't understand the law. The law says we have to give people notice in the area being annexed. And they thought, well, I'm next door to it. I didn't get a notice. And so I can understand where that confusion would come from. But the thing that scared me a little bit was the fact that the chairman of the committee took this so seriously, they changed the expiration date or the enactment date to immediately upon publication. And one of the good members from the Teton County talked about making an interim topic because they were so concerned about the testimony, when I think what really happened was people didn't understand the state law, and that's what caused it. So I wanted to just go through a little bit on an annexation we just did. 1,280 acres, High Plains Business Park is in the area that these folks were concerned about. And the first tab is the annexation report that we send out. It's required, and this is the annexation report that goes to all the people in the area being annexed. You can see the list on the second page of tab 1, all the folks that are in the area being annexed. And at the bottom of that page, you can see, I highlighted for you, in the city of Cheyenne. It doesn't cost
for just a
anything.
moment. Where exactly are you?
On tab 1 of that notebook I just gave you guys.
You're on tab 1 of the information that you sent,
Yes, sir,
provided to
that
us.
that black notebook that I gave each of you.
And for the rest of our visitors this morning, that is a document that is quite well put together. So just so we know what we're in and what we're referencing, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Mayor, thank you.
Yep, so we talked about no notice being given. So basically all this does is it just shows you what we do. The first page is the letter. This is a list of all the folks who we notice who are in the area being annexed. And at the bottom of the page, I highlighted the fact that when we annex a piece of property, we ask nothing from those landowners as far as cost for them to develop the property. And on the next page, it talks about the difference in taxes. So we notice people that. The fourth page is the list of all of the receipts we got from certified mail. We also have the list of the legal notice that we give out, and then also the map. So that's what we're required by law to do. On tab 2, though, in Cheyenne, we do things a little differently than some places. We annex and we do the zone change simultaneously. So at the same time, a week later, tab 2 is what we send out. And if you look at tab 2, it clearly states on the second line that there's an annexation, a zone change, and a future land use plan that's moving forward. There's a copy of the envelope. There's the 90 addresses that we sent that to, 88 of which were kept, 2 that were returned to us. And the last page of that is actually the signs that we put, 7 of them, around that property so people know that there's an annexation coming. We're trying to be very transparent. Line 3, or tab 3, I don't know if you guys have ever been through an annexation before, but this is an annexation. It shows you exactly what we have to do. If we start an annexation on March 1st, it takes us until May 9th before that annexation is done. And I think the key thing to know there is during that time, we had 7 public hearings where people got a chance to come and talk to us. We sent 2 legal notices. We mailed a notice to the folks inside the annexation area, the outside the annexation area, and we posted it on the property. So I think we've tried to do a good job of making sure that anybody in the area being annexed knows what's going on. It was interesting to me, though, because a lot of those folks said we were annexing them against their will. And so I listened to the report, I got their names, and on tab 4 is everybody that testified. And you can see from the maps here, not one of those people is in an area being annexed. I just thought that was interesting. But on the 4th and 5th page, we actually have pre-annexation agreements from 2 of those folks who live in an area we gave water to in 1970, and the property owners guaranteed that when the time came and the city wanted to annex them, they actually agreed to be annexed. So those documents are there. And then on page 5, it was alluded to about county pockets, or tab 5. And this is a map of Cheyenne, and I apologize, it's not very big, but we do have 65 county pockets where the city's grown around them, and their circumference is 100% touching the city limits. And we are in the process of working on annexing those properties. But I just wanted to show you what that looks like so you'd understand that part of it.
Mr. Mayor, on that front, is that very common? Where as a city grows, you end up with all of these island pockets? I guess that's new to me.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, through you. Most of our annexations, since I've been mayor, 2 years now, we've had 17 annexations. 16 of those have been landowner initiated, meaning people came to us with a petition and asked to become part of the city. And because of that, they're annexing the property they control. Well, their neighbors aren't part of that, and so they stay in the county, and eventually the city grows around them. It's probably not the best planning practices, but with our annexation laws, that's kind of how they work. And so we end up with these county pockets. Our city council has made that a goal to clean those up because we have some jurisdictional problems. And we also have testimony from our county clerk that it's very difficult to set precincts up and to ensure voter secrecy for people who live in those, because if there's not very many people, it's pretty obvious where they vote. And so they've come to us and asked us to clean that up also.
Well, and I assume, Mr. Mayor, that those, the services, you probably end up providing the services to those areas through the city quite a bit of the time, no?
Mr. Chairman, through you, I believe that we do. They live in our city. They're recreating using all of our services. And actually, the census actually counts them into our population because it's hard for them to distinguish where they are. So we learned from the census that they're actually already counted as part of our population. But it is a jurisdictional issue that we're trying to clean up.
Well,
So
thank you.
on House Bill 70, go
One
ahead.
more question, and
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt,
Please.
but we do have as we go along, I want to, go ahead, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, on that last point, Casper used to have some of those too. I think they've pretty much cleaned them up long since, but for a number of years that was present in Casper. Well, the question I've got on House Bill 73, as I read the provisions on page 3, lines 9 through 19, that the annexation requires a simple majority of the landowners, but that's different. Is there another provision that requires approval of a different majority? Is it a majority of the land or the landowners? This seems to be the landowners.
In House, Mr. Chairman, through you, I agree. In House Bill 73, it's a simple majority of the landowners. In current statute, it's 50% landowners or landowners owning 50% of the land can bring an annexation agreement. And I think that is a more powerful thing. I would hate to think that you had a 20-acre area, 3 neighbors, each owning, a couple acres, and they force annex, through that. So there's a protection in the existing law. That's why I think the existing law is so good, is I think it's really well thought out and it does protect the landowners. And so on House Bill 73, if you look at tab 6, this is where we had House Bill 142 does such a good job. If you look at page 3, and I have that for you, or page 2, lines 15 through 21. It talks about, sending by first-class mail to everybody within 550 feet. I believe that we need to do that, and I believe House Bill 142 does that really well. I don't know that we need that section if you pass 142. It's well-written. I think the number 300 feet is important. And if you turn the page, the second page of tab 6, you can see where we went through and did a survey of all the cities and towns, or a lot of them, and the majority of folks do their zoning notices at 300 feet. And I just thought to be consistent with notice, so that we gave notice to the same people on the annexation and the zone change, that would make a better number than 550. That's where the 300 feet came from when we amended that in the House. On tab 7, page 2, line 23, in the top of page 3, line 1 through 3, it requires notice to the landowner to respond. And I think it's important to know how annexations happen. There's 3 ways a piece of property can be annexed. So in Cheyenne's case, 16 out of 17 since I've been mayor have been annexed under 15-1-403. That's a landowner-initiated annexation, which requires that the landowners have to sign a petition and come to us and ask to be annexed. That's by far the majority of the way that annexations happen in Wyoming. And so there is no need to have a petition sent out and people to send back notice, because in order to be annexed, you got asked to be annexed. And so we already have their pre-approval before we even start that process. The second way you can annex a piece of property is under 15-1-404. And that is like the 4th page on the in that section. And it says a governing body of any city or town may initiate proceedings to annex territory by the following procedure. And we have to go through all the notice and do all the things that we would do in a typical annexation. But I think the key protection here is that in 15-1-406B, and that's on the next page, I highlighted it for you. It says if more than 50% of the landowners, or if a landowner or landowners owning more than 50% of the area being annexed file written objections with the clerk of the annexing municipality, then basically that annexation is void and we can't touch it again for 2 more years. And there's only one exception to that: if it's surrounded by the city, there is no appeal. It's a county pocket, it's an island within the city. To me, that honestly, that means it should be part of the city. And so I think it does a good job of protecting us there. So I don't know that we need this provision. The last is, if a city owns the land, we can annex the piece of property wherever it is, whether it's inside the city or whatever. 15-1-407 gives cities the right to annex land they own. And we have done that here just recently, maybe 6 times, as we're trying to buy land along the railroad tracks to build a greenway. We have annexed and we bought and annexed a bunch of land in order to accomplish that.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
he surrendered the chairmanship. He doesn't want to do it anymore. He's sick of this.
Chairman's back.
I'm very enthusiastic. Can I back you up just slightly?
Yes, sir, of
When
course.
you just were talking about 15-1-406,
Yes,
and this is, and then you mentioned section B, that if more than 50% of the landowners complain, and then you said the exception to that is the island situation. But the exception is, it's not quite an island. It's
75%.
75%. So it's a peninsula, I guess.
fair enough.
So
You're correct, Mr.
Okay.
Mr.
Just
Chairman.
wanted to double check if I missed
It's if, in C, it says if 75%, I highlighted that for you, of the perimeter of the area to be annexed is contiguous to the corporate limits, then in B, there is no appeal to that.
Did you actually do the highlighting?
Absolutely, sir.
Wow.
No, actually, on that case, one of my assistants did, but a lot of the highlighting you see I did by hand.
Okay, so you're fudging the truth.
Yeah.
Keep going, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and then on the eighth tab, we talk a little bit about page 3, lines 3 through 5. The notice of the opportunity to request an estimate of the required infrastructure required. So they're saying if you want to, you can request that. But if you look on the next page, 15-1-402 has a requirement, and it's on the 3rd page. It says the city will, the annexing municipality shall prepare a proposed annexation report, and it shall contain at the minimum. And if you look at 2, it says, total estimated cost of infrastructure improvements required of all landowners by the annexing municipality related to. So we're already giving it to them, so there's no reason for them to have to ask for it. We're required to give it to them already. And if you look at in tab 1 where we did the annexation report I showed you, where in the city of Cheyenne, that number is 0. We require nobody to pay any dollars when we annex them. It costs 0. Only when you develop the property, at that point, do you have to bring certain things in. And in Cheyenne's case, we actually said if you have to hook up to water or sewer, we don't consider that to be a development action because for humanitarian reasons, I don't want somebody to have to build a road and all that kind of stuff if their well or septic failed. We allow them to hook onto that without having any additional cost other than the cost of the water or sewer. And so I think on tab 8 and that section, there's already protection in the law. We already do that. So I don't see a reason to have to request that when we're already doing it. And then in the last tab 9, it says there's a vote required, 50% of the landowners on page 3, lines 9 through 19. Not fewer than a simple majority of the landowners, but we already talked about that in 15.1.403, which is the vast majority of annexations that happen in Wyoming. You have to have a petition from folks asking to be annexed. So we already have the prior approval. And if the city initiates an annexation, there is a defense against that. If people don't want to be annexed, all they have to do is tell us. And if 50% of the landowners or people owning 50% of the land say no, we're done. So it's a very big protection. I'll give you an example. We had a situation where a past mayor wanted to just go out a mile around the city and just annex the whole thing. Nice big square, we'd own it all. Well, obviously there was a protest on that, and that never got anywhere. So there's protection against cities who annex property against the will of people who live in the county. And with that, sir, I would answer any questions that you all might have.
Any questions for Mayor Collins? Any questions, Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the cost of the infrastructure, that's actually, it's available, but there is not a preemptive may not be the right word, but there's not we're providing this to you as part of the notice. It's available to them, but it's not part of the notice. And I think that's what this, the language on lines 3 and 4 just says, just let them know that it's available. I guess I would go further. I'd just say, make it available, send it to them in the notice. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think there is a difference between what the mayor is describing and what this bill is. There's not a difference. I would just give them the information instead of telling them that it is available. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, guys.
Did you wish to comment on that or anything? No. Okay, anybody else for Mr. Mayor? Thank you very much. Who else would like to address the committee on these bills? Mr. Winnie?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. On page 3, 15 through 17, you have an entry that says that absence of a response by a person would be counted as an approval, and I believe that to be inappropriate. Subject to questions. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Winnie? So you're talking about House Bill 72 and 73, I'm sorry. Yes, 73. And would you elaborate on why you think that's inappropriate?
Well, you're counting as an approval when somebody doesn't respond. And in my view, that would effectively inflate the vote on the approval side. Some people aren't going to respond. Other people, the mail might not get them a ballot or the notice in time, something like that. And I think whatever numbers you come up with for approval, disapproval ought to accurately reflect what people intended.
All right. Anybody else for Mr. Winnie? Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Who else would like to address the committee? Yes, sir, in the back. Let's come on up, and we've got other chairs you can just fill in. We'll make it a little quicker. Hi, I'm sorry I don't know you, but you've got one of those official badges, so welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ben Hornock. I represent the southwest corner of Laramie County here.
Welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'd just like to say that I'm in favor of this. I have a lot of people in my district that this does affect. One of the issues that I see this bill as being something that actually goes a step farther to protect private property rights. there's still the allowance for cities to annex these positions. There's still, people can still request to be annexed. This is fine. But there is a gap with throwing a letter in the mail and knowing where it goes. So that's really a problem, is that it seems like there has been, just a lack of, kind of a black hole when it comes to the information that people want to have. I actually received a notice on a piece of property that I have that requests they want to annex this piece of property in. The letter wasn't certified. It was just, I did get the letter, so I have to go through that process to make sure that if I want to or don't want to. And so one of the things that happens at the current bill is you do have a big developer that comes into any area within the city. They buy a large piece of county property, and then that, actually, a lot of times it's required for them to come into the city to be annexed. And the big developer, they're the sole owner of that piece of property, and they want to, because they want to provide those, they want to have the sewer, they want to have the water, they want to have that infrastructure coming to their property, and they want to build this piece of property out and develop into very small lots, which is fine. So, this will still allow them to be able to do that. It just kind of goes a step further to protect those people that have been living in the county for years. There's a reason why people buy in the county, and this goes a step further to protect those people.
So your comments are directed at House Bill 73.
73, yes, thank you.
Questions
Mr.
for
Chair.
Representative Warnock, is it? Thank you, sorry. Questions for Representative Warnock? Thank you very much. Ma'am, we'll go to you next.
Formby. I'm a citizen here in Cheyenne, in the county. And as Representative Warnock brought light to, there's a reason why some landowners buy in the county and we want to remain in the county. I believe that both bills strengthen the voice of the people and the ability for us to speak out about whether or not we want to be annexed. And so I am in favor of both bills. I appreciate some of the modifications that were voiced here as far as just taking into consideration what Mr. Winnie said about a no response being a yes vote. I think it's important to really get the voice of the people and not assume that no response means yes. One of the reasons that we bought in the county was just for our own private property rights. We liked having well water. We don't want to be put on city water. We don't want to be brought in against our will, and our neighbors have the same viewpoint. So I'm speaking here on behalf of myself and our neighbors who live in the county and want to remain in the county. Something too that I just really want the committee to think about and to be wary of, I'm sure you already are, but there's a movement for joint comprehensive planning and zoning and interlocal agreements, sometimes in partnership with the Department of Transportation. There's a movement for heritage area partnerships and land management plans. And I see when the voice is taken away from the people and when property is merged into the city, oftentimes, once government is consolidated and there's county positions that are eliminated through these previous types of agreements that I just spoke of, then it's very quick and easy for these agencies to take over private property and begin over-regulating it. This is not something that we want in the county. So I just want you to have a heads up about this if you don't already know about it. And I gave a sheet to the rest of you so that you can take a look at the different websites and things that talk about this and what might be coming down the pike. But here in Wyoming, we really want to protect our private property rights. So I approve both. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Formby. Let's see if there's any questions for you. Any questions for the lady? Thank you very much. And let me take a time out and apologize to Representative Hornock. Sorry, I was calling you Warnock, and I apologize. It's Hornok. Very sorry about that, and thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Believe me, we all have, but I apologize. I should have done better. Mr. Moline, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Committee. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau. Sitting in support of both of the bills, but if one was to go forward, I would appreciate House Bill 73. I appreciate that bill more than the other one. I think it's very important to put these issues to an actual vote of the people, rather than having them sign a petition, having them actually have a better say if they want to be annexed or not. And one of the difference between the two bills is the number of feet about providing notice. I would suggest going to the higher, especially, the higher, the 550 feet, I think is better than the 300 feet. The more area that you can get informed, better off you are. And given the time frame that some of these can take, those areas that are not going to be actually annexed but are in the vicinity of, that could affect the planning of those parcels. So I think giving the broader notice is a better idea than the lesser distance. They won't be able to vote, but I think getting that information out, what the future plans of the city is a great idea. So having that larger distance, but strongly support the ability of having people that are looking to be annexed actually have a vote on it. We're probably, we're not talking very much of a cost. I don't, when, as an example, where I live, we formed a road district. We did a mail ballot. The cost was minimal. I do appreciate that it is, the notice is first-class mail rather than certified mail, both for a cost savings. And there are some people, me not being one of them, but if they have a notice about a certified mail, they don't pick it up. They get notice that it's been delivered to their mailbox, but that's not proof that they ever actually received it, or if they have to go to the post, they just don't do it. That's a little bit of a fear factor. So I think the first-class mail is a great idea. And with that, Mr. Chairman, if the committee would have any questions for me, I would try to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Moline. They're stacked up. Let's go with Senator Landon and then Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Moline, speaking to that provision in the bill in 73, how do you feel about the lack of response being a positive in favor of annexation? I have the same concern you have, which is people don't read their mail. I worry about the response on this.
Mr. Moline.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, I'm glad you said that. That seems to be a little bit backwards the way we do most things. If you don't vote, it's typically a no vote. The best example I can come up with is on constitutional amendments. That if you are going to have that amendment pass, it has to be voted in the affirmative by a majority of the people that have voted. So people that are a no vote, that don't vote on it, are counted as a no vote. It seemed like for consistency, that would be the way I would prefer it, is that if you don't vote, it's a no vote. I don't know the reason why that is the way it is, but it seems to be a little bit out of alignment with the way we do other things, sir.
Senator Scott.
Chairman, I'm still confused about the whole vote process here, because it sounds like there's another section that also governs, that requires majority both of the landowners and of people owning a majority of the land. Does it both ways, as I understand it. And this is only the landowners. Two questions. Does the other section have if you don't respond, it's counted as a yes vote in it. And if you have it done two ways, which is going to govern? Do we need to mesh those two together somehow? Or are there going to be two votes? I am confused about how 142 is going to work, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Moline.
Chairman Kaye, Senator Scott, I believe that section that you are referring to is silent on the subject of who actually, if a vote is not cast, that it is a yes or a no vote. I believe that section, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm kind of shooting from the hip a little bit, sir, but I believe it's silent on that question. As far as who votes or what constitutes it passing, there's pluses and minuses of going both ways, where a large landowner can sway the vote if you do it by percentage of property. But then sometimes having more property on an issue like this, perhaps they should have a greater vote. If I remember right, senators, that it used to be that to get a hospital, to get a tax for an example, a hospital, in order to get that in front of the commissioners, it had to be a majority or a certain percentage of the property ownership. So a percentage of the value rather than numbers. There's pluses and minuses going both ways, but I do think that those sections need to be consistent. So the easiest way would be to amend amend 73 to reflect the language that's in the current statute.
Thank you. We might hear from others about that. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is what the mayor referred to, 15406B, and the language is if more than 50% of the landowners, or if a landowner or landowners owning more than 50% of the land. And this is a written objection. This is not a ballot which is being contemplated in this. This is a written objection to an annexation action within 20 days. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
So then, as I understand, with that reading, you have to get approval both ways, or at least not have a rejection.
Senator Barlow,
Mr. Chairman, it's or.
Yeah.
Majority or majority of the landowners or a majority of the land.
So either could.
The way I read it, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman.
Either could stop it.
Correct. Okay. Anything else from Mr. Moline? Thank you, Mr. Moline. Is there anybody else who'd like to testify on the bill? Anybody else? Yes, sir. And let's go ahead and fill in these seats if there are more people that want to testify. I'm going to assume that we don't have any more after you, sir. Thank you very much. Go ahead. You got to, if you look, there's a button on the bottom of that mic, and it should be a green.
Hello?
There you go.
Thank you. My name's Patrick Formby, and I'm a landowner in the county. Thank you for letting me speak, Chairman Case.
You bet.
I have a concern about the process, just like you, Senator Scott. I'm wondering if there's only the ability to reject from a standpoint of 50% of the land, according to the petition and the response to a petition, or can they also approve? Either way, can they reject or approve, or can they only reject? Is a question I have. But regardless, I do think that I would agree that one vote is a fair representation. It's a representation across the board and voting in other circumstances. So I would appreciate that to be part of it. And I am definitely in support of both bills, with no disrespect intended to anyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Formby. Is there any questions for Mr. Formby? Thank you, sir. Mr. Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Fraser, Executive Director, Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I would defer to the senator if that's the chair's preference.
You've got
Okay. I just wanted to reiterate, just to be clear and succinct, our position on these bills. Because we're hearing them both together. As to Bill 142, we do support that. We think that, better notice is not a bad thing. And so we certainly support that. We oppose 73, and the reason we oppose it is quite simply that it's at best redundant and really kind of puts the cart before the horse. What I mean by that is that in the present statute, which has ample protections for landowners, as you just discussed, there's actually two different groups of landowners, as it were, either of which can kill it. But what this bill contemplates is a pre-approval of an annexation before the education process has fully taken place. So in the current statute, without either of these bills in the current statute, notice is sent out, a study is done, notice is sent out, a hearing is held, and that hearing has a twofold purpose. One, of course, is to hear from the public before the governing body makes its decision. The other, though, if you've attended one of these hearings, is an educational component that the city provides during that hearing, talking about what's proposed to be done. And so then after there's been sufficient education process and sufficient opportunity for the governing body to hear from those affected and anyone else, it's an open hearing, then the governing body would make its decision. And then if the landowners, the majority of the landowners or the owners of a majority of the land protest, it's dead and can't even be reconsidered for 2 years. So again, we really think that the current system works well. That doesn't mean that there's never anybody who disagree, That doesn't mean that there's never any disagreement, but it does give ample opportunity under the current system for everybody to know what they're voicing their opinion about, and to not only voice their opinion, but to actually stop the proceedings if a majority of them feel that way. So for that reason, we would support 142 and we would oppose 73. I would certainly take any questions if there's anything that I can clarify for the committee.
Senators, any questions for the Association of Municipalities? Mr. Frazier, thank you for being here. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Let's go on. Senator Hutchings.
I'm back,
And then
Mr.
we'll
Chair.
come to you, ma'am. Thank you for being here.
I just wanted to clarify something. The bringer and I had talked about this yesterday. This section on page 3, 16 through 19, that was an amendment on the House side. The bringer was not actually in agreement with that. Section 6, where it says of this subsection shall be considered an approval of the proposal annexation if they don't send in their votes. So we would like to have that amended to read just the opposite, if you guys would be in agreement. We are actually for that. So maybe to stop the discussion on it, we want that out of there.
So Senator Hutchings, as I read that, that was an amendment offered on second reading in the House, and it was offered by Representative Singh and Representative Stivar. They both proposed that. It was in the same context of the previous amendment had dropped the 2/3 down to a simple majority. So it looks to me like they were kind of making adjustments.
I think they were trying to, but I'll let him speak for himself. How's that?
Okay, thank you, Senator Hutchings. Representative Stivar, tell us how that came about.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This come out with discussion on the floor to move it forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how come this amendment came out.
Compromise kind of thing, right?
Yes, Senator.
Maybe unwilling, but, right? Gotcha. I've been around a while. Thank you, Representative. Anybody else for the representative? Thank you very much. Let's go to you, ma'am. How are you? Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Case, and thank you for allowing me here today and other senators. My name is Susan Lone, and I'm in Cheyenne here, and I'm one of the people that could possibly be annexed into the city. I'm not in a pocket. But when I learned about that, I started kind of looking into things, and you know what? I think there's an agreement with Ms. Formby. There is a larger agenda going on, and I think that does really require some insight in looking into that type of thing. And I am in favor of the House Bill 73, but I just wanted to share a couple statistics that I thought were interesting. And am I close enough that you could hear?
You're doing good.
Okay.
Closer is always better on these darn microphones.
Okay. There was a man, his name is Norman James. He was an attorney with Fenmore Craig. And based on the Department of Interior and the things that they were trying to do along with executive orders with our federal government, he found some interesting information, and I'd like to just share real quick. He said that when they do the annexation, there's a thing out there called the Land Grab 3030. And that is where the federal government desires to purchase 30% of the land in all of the states that they will own. And so when they start annexing, they're bringing us into the cities and opening up these lands to the federal government. Well, he learned when he started studying this was that we are losing a football field of land every 30 seconds, or about 3,000 acres per day, which equals 1.1 million acres per year, or 11 million acres per decade. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And so that's why I've been looking to the future on things, because it's so important. And that's why I believe that the annexations that they do, they really need to have the people's input to see, so that we can, be involved in knowing what's going on in the future, especially for children. And that was just my comments I wanted to share.
Thank you, Ms. Long. Thank you very much. Questions for Ms. Long? Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Case, members of the committee. My name is Steve Milia here in Cheyenne. I'd like to give my support for both of these bills that are brought forward. I'd like to bring up, I was born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, and then about 30 years ago, I came to my senses and moved to Wyoming. And the reason I bring up Omaha is because back in the 60s, when I was a teenager, the town of Millard was being annexed by Omaha. Everybody in Millard, from what I remember from the news reports, did not want it. The mayor didn't want it, the council didn't want it, the services didn't want it, the people didn't want it. Omaha was able to go ahead and do it anyway against all those wishes. And I remember the first day that the police car rolled through from Omaha into Millard. They had a lot of resentment out there. I mean, they all got over it. I mean, it was like, 50 years ago? But the point was that the people of Millard wanted to remain the town of Millard. But Omaha said, nope, we want you. It's the way the state law written, and we are going to annex you. So it was against the vote of the people. And so here, I think it's very important that the people, the landowners say, this is what we want annexation, or we don't want annexation. So this is a government of by and for the people. Not that the government is against that, but I think that the people need to have their voices heard, and I stand in complete support for both of these bills. Thank you.
Listen, how do you say your name again, sir?
Milia. M-E-L-I-A.
This question from Mr. Milia.
Milia. It's like Amelia Earhart, just no A on the front.
Okay. Milia, thank you very much. Anybody question? Thank you, sir. Who else would like to address the committee? Not seeing any in the room. We got anybody online? Just one online? Let's let her in.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Marie Lowe, and I live in Sheridan, and Senator Kinski and Representative Western brought forth Bill 142 at my request. Excuse me. But first I wanted to thank all you legislators there for all your work that you do in Cheyenne. I know sometimes it feels like a thankless job, but I want you to know how much I appreciate all the work you do all year, not just at the legislature. So thank you so much. And
Thank you, ma'am.
yeah, and for the opportunity to speak. So I'm going to tell you just a short story why this came to be, but really the bill is about transparency, just letting people know. It's just simply letting everybody know. I live on the edge of the city and the county. I do live in the city. And a neighbor requested an annexation on a piece of property that is directly across the street from me, about 20 feet away. The county neighbors were notified, and I live in a development with about 50 houses, and none of us were notified about the annexation. We found out when 6 months later, when the developer requested a subdivision. That was the first we learned about the annexation. And part of it is just logistics, like you could see no sign. That's the only other way we would have been notified is sign. But the interesting thing is we have an emergency exit out of our subdivision through county land. It's not paved. And so the developer was gonna, and it's private road, but because it's an emergency exit, they can't stop the public from using it. So the developer was going to use that private emergency unpaved exit as access to the subdivision. And yet we didn't even know anything about it. And so, you know, I just think it's good to let people know. Nobody in our subdivision was opposed to more houses being built, but we were opposed to not being notified and using our private road without access. And excuse me, it specifically said that he had no requirement to help with any kind of maintenance ever. It actually specifically said that. So of course I got a little incensed about that injustice. And he was going to pave part of it, and it's on our private road, and we didn't even know anything about it. So really, we could have had much better conversations early on had we known about the annexation.
Thank you, ma'am. Your last name is Lowe?
Lowe, L-O-W-E.
Thank you very much. Questions for Ms. Lowe? Questions? I think you picked the right guys to carry your water for you down here in Cheyenne.
I think so too.
There you go. Okay, thank you, Ms. Lowe. Nobody else testimony? I think we'll close testimony on both bills. Committee, shall we discuss kind of where to go on these two things? What's the pleasure of anybody? Senator Scott, you got that look. You know that look.
Mr. Chairman, I think that 142 clearly is useful and ready to move forward. 73, I'm concerned about having two different ways of landowners objecting or voting on this same parcel on an annexation. And I'm concerned about the difference in the distances. I'm not convinced that 73 is ready for prime time.
And Senator Scott, if I recall, I think you were part of when we reworked, we had the moratorium on annexation. Do you remember that? And this committee reworked
Yes, we
that.
had, and that was prompted, Mr. Chairman, as I remember, by some particularly abusive processes that were going on that I think have ceased.
So I noticed when the mayor was going over a lot of the rules and regulations and the statute, that's very familiar from that time we undid the moratorium. Other thoughts? Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So having spent some time trying to understand this annexation law, because I do not live near a municipality, and for good reason, as other folks have said. I do think, I mean, I believe that 73 or 142 can move forward without, I am interested in trying to bring in some of the cost, the estimates of cost, even though it seems to be zero to everybody. I don't know that that's always true. I am interested to know, so I don't know, I'm not going to bring an amendment here, but I'm going to visit with the proponents of 142 or 73 to try to understand, is there a timing issue that we could get there? I would note, though, to the broader question of annexation, even though the good mayor lined out a timeline that seems like it's, there's a lot of process, it's actually a very short timeline, in my view. And for those that are landowner initiated, I think you've got the pre-approval. So 73 doesn't seem necessary. But for ones that are municipality initiated, I do think that maybe it's an interim topic we take a look. I would be willing to take a look at to say, is there a process that we just give people a little more understanding and say before we start impacting their private property rights with this governmental action? So I'll be favorable to 142 for now, but I am convinced that there is maybe some potential to look at this further. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anybody else? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, just real quickly, I'm still struggling with the language on page 3 in House Bill 73. I kind of lean the same way that the senator does with respect to those conflicts that have come up this morning, trying to figure out what laws we already have in place and what this does. We talked about, with our Farm Bureau representative, a no vote is a positive vote, and I'm just not sure I'm on board with that yet. So I've got my hesitations with House Bill 73. I'm on board with House Bill 142.
Okay. Well, why don't we move forward? It sounds like the chair would be seeking a motion on 142. Who would like to offer? It's got it by Scott. Discussion on 142? Discussion? Senator Scott, any discussion? Any changes, any amendments? Would you call the roll on 142?
Senator Barlow. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Scott.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye. So 5 ayes, that's carried. Anything further? Any amendments, any motion? Not detecting a motion. Would anybody like to we could give it a positive motion and vote no, or we can leave it on the table. If we don't finally dispose of it, it's open for re-referral. So that's something to worry about.
I'll move the bill for discussion.
Okay, I've got a motion on the bill. Any proposed amendments or discussion? Senator Barlow.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned, I'm going to actually visit with the sponsor of this bill to see if there's something we can bring in on as information and part of the notice to the other bill.
Okay.
But I'm not going to be favorable to this bill as it currently stands. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, looking around, anybody else want to say anything? Would you call the roll, please?
Senator Barlow.
No.
Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Landon.
No.
Senator Scott. Mr. Chairman.
Aye. The bill has failed 3-2. So thank you very much. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 106. Who would be presenting that bill? Welcome. And Senator Steinmetz, did you want to join at the dais, please? We'd love to have you.
Thank you.
Representative Slagle, get that tight and close. Shove it through that beard. Get up to the.
Thank you, Chairman Case. And
this is just a terrible room for acoustics. It's the worst one in the whole Capitol complex, so you have to really get it close.
Stay close. Okay, I will do that. And I'm bringing to you House Bill 106. This is a bill that was brought to my attention by constituents my district, they were concerned. And basically what this bill does is it just reinstates the moratorium on eminent domain that has been in our statute. So if you look on page 2, line 6, just insert a new expiration date, June 30th, 2032. And so the rest of it's all in statute right now. And the concern that came from my constituents, that the reason we brought this bill is there's been a land or a wind energy development company that has approached the state to lease state lands to put up wind generators. And the way my constituents found out about it is they got notice from the state land department asking for a co-consent to allow the wind generation company to lease the lands that they're currently leasing for livestock grazing. And other than that, they had not been informed. And so their concern was this wind company is going to come in, lease the state lands, put up wind generators, and then to get the energy out of there, they're going to have to go across private lands. And where they haven't been talking to any of the private landowners, they're afraid that they will use condemnation to put their distribution lines across. And so because of the lack of communication of this company, there was concern from the private landowners. So with that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Representative Slagle. Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, this affects my district as well, so I appreciate your attention on the matter in general. I just have to say that the way this particular, I don't think it's even a development company, it's just a bunch of consultants that are getting paid a fee that clearly have no idea what they're doing. If they're going about, the first point in contact the state lands office, there's something wrong there. That's not how you develop a project like this. So I agree that there's a concern there, and I think it has maybe more to do with our state lands office than anything else. My question is, why are you bringing this bill, which has broad implications for the entire state, not just dealing with this particular issue that we're dealing with?
Well,
Representative Slagle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Boner, I think the reason I'm bringing this, I realize it has broad implications across the state, but I think ultimately it's a private lands issue. And I don't think it matters whether it's in my district or on the west part of the state. Private lands should be protected from private companies coming in and using an eminent domain to gain access.
Senator Boner.
Mr. Chairman, so what about the private property rights of the folks who maybe want a wind farm on their land?
Well,
Representative Slagle, we'll go through the chair.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. As far as that goes, I'm not saying people can't develop wind on their property, but I feel that the landowners next to them should have the same right to negotiate with the wind farm or the wind farm generators for the distribution lines as the people that are actually getting the wind turbines on their place. Does that make sense?
Anybody? Back to Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Representative, you mentioned that apparently a parcel of state land is what's in question over in your neck of the woods. But there was notice sent to adjacent property owners. Is that my understanding? There was no notice, or how did that work?
Representative Slagle.
Mr. Chairman, what it was it's the wind company is asking to lease state lands. And so because of that, those state lands are already leased for grazing to adjacent landowners. And so the state has to send out a co-consent form to the present leasee. And so that's how they got notified. So, I mean, that's why there's a lot of questions in my mind in the way that it's being handled.
So a follow-up.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman. So Representative, if that wind farm were to come into being on that state property, I would assume that if they needed to get power out of that project, isn't that where they would, it seems like they would work with those adjacent landowners and pay them for the consent, would they not?
Representative Slagle?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, you would presume that, but the thing is it's concerning when the first people they talk to is the state and don't talk to any of the adjoining private landowners, because they should have that plan in place already where they're going to go with that power. So they should have been, at least in my opinion, they should have already been talking to landowners for where those distribution lines will be going.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I wish
Go
the
ahead.
State Lands Office would have done that as well. So thank you, Representative.
Thank you. Senator Scott?
Chairman, if you look on the language on page 1, starting at line 4, really starting in line 13, there's an exception here, except a public utility that has been granted a certificate of public convenience and necessity. So they would not, as I read, a public utility that was reaching this wind farm would not be affected by this moratorium. It would be just a developer that wasn't a public utility. Is that a correct understanding, and how important is that exception?
I think that is true, Senator Scott. Representative Slagle?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I believe that is the way it would be. So any existing public utility would have the right to come in and condemn if that was the case. It just wouldn't be for these private energy companies that are for profit to have that ability. And the reason that's there, the only thing we changed in this in statute was just the expiration date of the moratorium. It wasn't, we didn't change any other language. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Senator Steinmetz, would you like to add anything, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On in support of this bill, adjacent landowners have not been contacted. That is part of the issue. The private property owners surrounding this over 100,000 acre proposed wind farm have not been contacted. And it shouldn't be the purview of state lands to contact non-lessees about a wind project that a private company is proposing on state lands. So it's clearly a failure of the company in this certain instance. However, I believe this bill is good public policy, because private property owners should be able to come to the table and have a say in how these wind farms are being developed and the collector lines coming across their private property. And so to me, it's just a good policy. It arose out of our district, our joint district. However, I think it bodes well for the entire state, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Steinmetz. So just to ask a question, it seems to me that in the law with respect to eminent domain, it's frequently granted to public entities, and that would be municipalities. I don't know how it works with counties, but for certainly municipalities, districts, especially districts that have public districts that are construction orientated, like irrigation districts or other kinds of improvement districts. It's also in the law that public utilities regulated public utilities enjoy the power of eminent domain for their lines and facilities, their network infrastructure. That's longstanding. They have something that is called a certificate of public convenience and necessity, where they're kind of empowered by a regulatory process to be able to build facilities for the good of everyone. I can't think this is the question I have for you, I can't think in law where there's a eminent domain is given to private entity for private purpose. And maybe I can just see, I know when Senator Scott's got something on his mind, it's kind of easy. But anyway, I'll let you answer it first, and we'll go to Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know of that either, but maybe the good senator who's been here longer than both of us might.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, in the Constitution, private power of eminent domain is provided for irrigation works.
Yes.
And as a way of necessity, where you have property that is totally landlocked and can't get to your private property.
And that's the one that the counties can order, right?
Well, there is a county procedure, but there's also a constitutional
I see.
procedure that can be done entirely privately. In addition, I believe railroads have a
And they're
power
private
of
companies, but-
eminent domain. It's not that uncommon, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair.
So I think the railroad is regulated.
Yeah.
That was where regulation first started with
But
public
the water
utilities.
users,
And pipelines that are common carriers, I know, I don't know about other pipelines. But, so, anybody else on this point? All right, let's hear other testimony on this issue. Thank you very much, Mr. Michael. Welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be with you this morning. Matt Michael, I'm with the law firm Holland and Hart, here testifying on behalf of American Clean Power Association. Feel a little bit of PTSD. We've been through a lot of these eminent domain discussions over the last 2 decades. I'll try to keep my comments short and answer any questions that you have. I think the senators have hit on some of the main issues. The first one is that the specific facts around this case really don't have anything to do with our eminent domain laws. It is a state lands issue. I don't know the company that participated in that. They're not one of our member companies. And I don't know the backgrounds on that other than what I've heard in hearings. And that was a notice, state lands, state leases. I can come up with lots of hypotheticals, but I know that it wasn't an eminent domain case. And that leads me to my second point, that since 2015, since the independent power producers have had the right of eminent domain, there's never been a case that any of us are aware of, and we've polled the membership and we've looked and we've tried to, you can't prove a negative. I don't know, I can't say definitively, but we've done everything we can, and we have not seen a single case of the use of eminent domain by these independent power producers in a wind project. And then that leads me to my third point, and that is because we've been through a lot of this together, and over the last, really literally 20 years, 15 years, we've created eminent domain statutes that are very fair and very favorable for landowners. And I can tell you that any company that engages in this will use eminent domain only as a source of last resort. Like I said, we've been through, and I think a lot of the people in the room, we've been through these discussions together, and we've made our statutes to be very favorable for the landowners. And in fact, if this company that was there was ever even contemplating eminent domain, would have had to go out to these landowners. I don't know what they did, but I know that they weren't contemplating eminent domain or wouldn't have had the right to do it without significant notice provisions and significant steps they would have had to do with those landowners. So those are my 3 main points. We can talk through the details. Mr. Chairman asked about other private entities. If there is a condemnation case, if there is an eminent domain case, there are instances where private entities can go forward and use eminent domain. And in our Constitution and in our statutes, it provides for ways of necessity, or these energy type projects is a common place where eminent domain is granted, both in the Constitution and in statute. But what you have to show, and what these projects, if they ever wanted to have the right under current law, they would have to show a public purpose. So there's no private right of eminent domain for a private purpose. So right now, if a wind company under current law wanted to use this, they would have to show a way of necessity. They have to show that this piece of property was necessary for this project, that the overall project was in the public interest, and that there was a public purpose for the project. And then they would have to show all these steps that they'd taken with the landowner, all these notice, all these negotiations that we've put out, and then they would have to pay fair compensation, just compensation. And we've spent, again, a lot of time talking about what that is, and I submit that it is now a very fair process and something that's favorable for the landowners. So with that, I'll sit for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Michael? Representative Senator Boner. Had too many representatives in front of us with House Bill, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, so going back to that discussion about this exemption in the bill for public utilities, in your experience, how often does the utility itself actually go out and put this project together, these sorts of projects together? And is that a common occurrence? I'm just going back to Senator Scott's question. I think you might be in position to actually answer it. How is meaningful is that exemption for public utilities?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that clarifying question. I think that was a point that was brought up. There are different types of wind projects that are impacted by this specifically. The public utility, so that's, Rocky Mountain Power or Black Hills or those regulated, they go and they get they're regulated by the PSC. There's a second type, and those are the independent power producers. And those are the ones that would be impacted by this. And so these are other projects, but this still is power that is sold to the utilities, and it is power that's produced and then sold. So it would be those independent power producers that sell their power through a power purchase agreement that would impact, that would lose the right of doing this. Now, the follow-up question is, so what? If you guys have never used this power of eminent domain, why do you need to have it? And I would submit that this is actually a protection for landowners that want to have projects built on their project. So if I'm a rancher and I want to have a wind farm developed on my farm, and we get a group of us, and there's 5 or 6 of us that want to do it, but our neighbor's an out-of-state NIMBY, I bought my little piece of Wyoming heaven, and he says, never, no way, under any circumstances will I ever allow a power line to go across me. They have a veto power over that project. And so what Wyoming law has done, our Constitution, and it really came about in kind of the mining aspect and the irrigation aspect, but they said that there is this limited right to get access across somebody else's property if you prove those elements. And so what this does is it protects me as a landowner from having a neighbor have veto power over allowing me to develop my property as I see fit.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on page 2, Mr. Michael, thanks for being here. What this bill would do then is resurrect a bill that sunsetted back in 2015. My curiosity is, what changed in 2015? What can you reflect for us over these last 8 years?
Mr. Michael.
Mr. Chairman, right. I mean, there's a whole history on all of these things. Really, in my opinion, just from being involved in this, if you remember in 2009, 2010, there were a lot of wind projects that were online. There were a lot of projects planned, way more than actually were built. We can talk about what happened in that interim. And there was a thought of let's take a break. Let's don't just throw these projects up all over willy-nilly. Let's take a break. Let's see how these get planned. And they just put a sunset on it at 2015. I don't know that there was any magic number of why they sunsetted it at 2015. I think it was just to let this new, we hadn't had a lot of wind development before then. Let's see what happens. But since 2015, there has been a right of eminent domain that these independent power producers have had and have never had to use it, which is a good thing. I think it shows that our laws are working.
Thank you for that.
Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Michael. Thank you very much. Who else would like to testify on this bill? Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council. And we supported the original moratorium back in 2010. We supported the extensions to the moratorium in the years that it was extended. So the original sunset date was 2011. It was brought forward from the Wind Energy Task Force that took place in 2010 during that interim session. And then it was extended for several periods of time after that original date. And it has good reason to come back to you today. So essentially, back in that time frame, we looked at wind rights, we looked at property rights, the ability for landowners to negotiate. As a state, you might remember, we specifically stopped severance of wind rights. That was actually on the table as a conversation back in the day. And partly because we wanted landowners for wind projects to have the right to say no or yes to a project. And that applies both to the land where the turbines are being located, but also to adjacent land. So here you have a situation where the landowner can say yes or no to a project, but its neighbors don't have that right. They are forced to deal with the prospect of eminent domain. So that's an injustice, and we really believe that it should be fixed through this law. I'd also encourage you to think of the situation where even if eminent domain is not used, it's always at the table. It's always the state's thumb on the scale in negotiations. And it's really important, I think, for the state to recognize private property rights for the entirety of the project, not just where the turbines are being proposed. And with that, we support the bill and we support the concept before you today. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Questions for Ms. Anderson? Thank you very much. Who else would like to address the committee? Aha. Mr. Moline, I confess I didn't think you were in the room. You were behind the pillar. So I was sending you an email.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in front of you again in support of this bill. Powder River Basin Resource Council said it very well. Eminent domain is very seldom used, which it should be very seldom used. However, when one side has got the biggest hammer in the fight, it's not a real level playing field. And in my opinion, what this does is by having this moratorium, it levels the playing field a little bit more in favor of the landowner. And this does not, as indicated, in my opinion, it probably won't stop any projects. I think it'll give the landowners for the collector lines a little bit better negotiating position. And with that, Mr. Chairman, sitting in favor of the bill, I would entertain any questions you or the committee may have.
Thank you very much. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish someone from the Rural Electric Association was here at this moment, but we have experts on I understand what a transmission line is. I understand what a distribution line is. I'm not sure what a collector line is based on those two concepts. And I'm not sure if a rural electric is always considered a public utility, but to the chairman. So those three questions, and I'd be glad to take anybody's response to those. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Moline, did you want to try to address that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Barlow, thank you for the opportunity, but the good chairman has much better knowledge of this than I do. I would defer to the chairman.
So I think it could be a little bit gray sometimes, but there's a requirement that public utilities have to purchase renewable power from independent operators. And so that's not the way most of the projects come about now. Now they're contract and fulfillment of power company solicitations, or usually the wind farm's kind of developed and then they negotiate whether the power company wants it or not. But they have to take it in the end under PURPA rates. But these are the lines that connect the independent facility to the transmission lines of the power company. They're not owned by the power company. They're not part of the power company planning process per se. And that's the lines we're talking about. An REA, yes, I'm pretty sure that almost every level of REA would have public utility status and the ability to use eminent domain, even if it's just a transmission and generation utility as opposed to a distribution utility. I'm quite confident they would fall under that. These are lines that connect privately developed facilities where it's for profit. And they have the ability at the very end to actually force the utility to take the power. And they also, under Wyoming law, have the ability to force their way across your neighboring land. So anybody else? Anybody else like to testify on this bill? Thank you, Mr. Moline. Anybody else? Anybody online? Let's have Mr. Lay. I'm very glad to see him. Been a while. The question for the committee, everybody will be, where is Mr. Lay? Is he in Wyoming or is he in DC right now? Ken Lay? Mr. Lay?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm here to support this legislation. I thought that Ms. Anderson did an excellent job in discussing the history of all of this. I think this is a fundamental private property right that we need to be very conscious of. And Mr. Chairman, as you've described, we have independent power producers that under various provisions of federal law can in effect force public utilities to receive the power that they generate, but they are still private entities. These are not entities that have any of the what I would call public character that you will find with Rocky Mountain Power and so forth. I would also point out that even when power is not going to be purchased by the public utility that serves Wyoming or that serves the neighboring states in that network, there are provisions of federal law that can require transmission access to be granted to projects of this kind. And there are a number of them pending that, are, again, fully private projects. And unless we restore the moratorium, they again would be able to force their collector lines across private property. And I think this is, I always am mindful that if a project of this kind wants access and wants to get across private property, hey, you can negotiate and you can have that discussion. And it may very well be, there may be occasions on which a landowner would simply say, there's no amount you can pay me that will induce me to let you put transmission lines across my property. And on the other hand, but that is the work. No, that's what I would call a fully functioning, private capital market. And on the other hand, the developer may say, okay, well, I now have much better bargaining. If you give them the eminent domain, then of course they have a degree of bargaining power that is unfair to the private property owner that finds him or herself happening to be in the way of that project. And I would come back to the point again that yes, eminent domain is longstanding, but it has traditionally been focused very heavily on what are clearly public interests and public requirements. And I think in this instance, because of the way this business has evolved, that's not the case with the collector line infrastructure that we're talking about in connection with this bill. So I strongly support the reinstatement of this moratorium and would hope that the Senate would go forward with it. Thank you.
Let me do some housekeeping. We're not going to get to the next bill, so I apologize to Mr. Montoya for stretching your morning out a little bit. So come back. We'll put it up as a first order of business on Thursday. And thank you very much. Apologize. All right. Questions for Mr. Lay? Any questions for Mr. Lay? Any question? Not seeing any question for Mr. Lay. Anybody else online wish to testify? Anybody else in the room? Committee, you've heard the discussion. What's your pleasure? And a motion by Barlow. Discussion. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I'm really 50-50 on this bill. I'm struggling with it, but I do go to the language on page 2. The moratorium, 2015. or upon the effective date of legislation establishing additional conditions for the use of condemnation authority, et cetera, et cetera. Given what spawned this particular bill, I'm just curious why we didn't attack that part of the world instead of reinstating a moratorium that sunsetted in 2015. Certainly, we could have considered all kinds of conditions that would have.
Sounds like an interim topic to me, Senator.
That's where I was going.
Okay.
So I'm a little hesitant on this bill. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Discussion? I'm supporting the bill. I find it unusual that this is a total private entity that can pick where it wants to go and make a really sweetheart deal with a landowner that gets their support and destroys their neighbors in the process. And I know that some don't agree with me on that, but they can force their way across their neighbor's property. And I actually think the landowner in Wyoming, when you hear people supporting wind development, they're landowners. And they're getting a good deal. Everybody else isn't getting a good deal. And I think it's time in America that the renewable energy starts paying its fair share of the costs they impose on everybody, including these landowners. Senator Boner.
Yeah, just as everybody knows, we have one farm on our place. We also have collector lines going across our place, substations from a situation that the chairman just described, where our neighbors get the turbines and we don't. We get the collector line. I just don't think that, the idea that our place is destroyed by a collector line is not accurate in my experience. So that being said, now there's this proposed project would directly affect a lot of folks in Commerce County. I just want to make it very clear that, I don't personally own any of the surface of the family ranch for that reason. And a few others, I don't think I have a conflict. Even if I did, I think I'd be a class of person. So just want to make that abundantly clear. Now, if this bill were specifically geared towards the situation we heard in Niobrara and Commerce County, maybe that would change it. But I just point out that this is a very broad piece of legislation that affects everybody in Wyoming, in spite of the reason for the bill being brought forth. So I just don't think it's the right method for addressing a problem. I think that having gone through the process through our Industrial Siting Council, the county commissioners have to approve this sort of development, and there's no way that any of the county commissioners are supporting the proposed development, as I understand it, just because it has been so ham-handed and poorly handled. So for that reason, I'll be against the bill. I think it's the fact is, when this moratorium was in place, I don't think a single wind farm was built in this state, and it seems to me to be completely unnecessary.
Thank you, Senator Boner. Anybody else? Let's call for the roll on the bill, please.
Senator Barlow? Aye. Senator Boner?
No.
Senator Landon?
No.
Senator Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman?
Aye. Bill's passed, 3 ayes. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we didn't get to the other bill. Apologize for anybody hanging around for that. Thank you very much. We'll take I think we'll keep going at the same pace, everybody. We'll probably just be starting at 8 o'clock on Thursday, and we'll just work House bills till we get done. Thank you very much. We have